a great deal of time and many areas of Canada. And each school at each time frame has to be analyzed in its own right. And it's a balance sheet that we haven't really been able to figure out very objectively because of the intimidation that has happened. And the intimidation is this label of residential school denialism. First of all, the term is silly because it implies that you're denying the existence of residential schools, which is not what that is. In my analysis of this term, what it actually means is that you are denying that the residential schools were genocidal. That's really what they're getting at, and they're trying to make a direct link to the Holocaust in these discussions. My own view is that the residential schools were not genocidal, but I think there were problems with the residential schools, especially in the early years when there was competition for resources, and Aboriginal people were quite vulnerable compared to other groups in society. And so in the kind of battles for resources, there was a great deal of neglect. And because I am not, I'm just going to say this, I'm an atheist. I'm not a fan of religious education. I would argue that, telling children that they're going to burn in hell for things is not a good thing to be teaching people. And that probably happened at some residential schools. And so I think that was not good either. And the corporal abuse, and there was sexual abuse likely to have happened like happened in all institutional settings. And so there's problems, but education is not a problem. Teaching children to read and write is not a problem. Teaching children discipline so that they'll be able to participate in a more developed society is not a problem. So these kinds of things have to be disentangled and to be examined academically and objectively, not with this kind of intimidation which screams residential school denialism every time someone puts up their hand and says, hey, what about this situation or what about that situation? So any other people who would like to comment on this issue? Yes. Would you like to come up to the mic?
All right, so this is a very fun thing, I guess.
Take your mask off. I can't hear you. Take your mask off.
Okay, guys.
A lot of white people who owned slaves thought that they were uplifting them. A lot of instances in history in which white people have taken and oppressed a people have to justify it. They have to absolve themselves of their white guilt, which is what all of you are doing right now, is trying to rid yourselves of that white guilt. Is try to paternalize it, try to put yourself in the position of a parent over a wayward child, over a savage, unkempt child. When in reality, the only thing you're doing is making them suffer needlessly. For 100 years, children suffered needlessly. They were told not to speak their own languages. They were ripped from their families. These are basic facts of how this system worked. John A. MacDonald, the fucking famous quote, "Kill the Indians, save the child," that was indigenous policy applied to children for over 100 years. And that is all I have to say.
I just want to respond to you, sir.
Yeah.
Hi. No, you though.
Okay. Doesn't want to know.
He's listening.
Okay. All right. Anyways,
Well, why don't you just respond to that
I guess I
argument?
will.
Yeah,
Okay.
just respond to the
I
argument.
just want to go back. Yeah, I will. Okay. I just want to reiterate something I said before. I wanted to say it to him. In that moment when Sarah Beaulieu realized, wait a sec, I fucked up here, and these guys are not murdered children. Wasn't that a moment of happiness that she should have shared with the band and everybody? I mean, isn't this a fundamental point? It's not like we've got murdered victims and we don't know who they are. We don't have a crime. Isn't that a point of redemption? So I think your criticisms are misplaced. There you go.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, give it back to That's all right.
Hal, you want to talk?
All right, here we go.
Sure, I was born in this city. How about that?
Back when it was cool.
Yeah, and I took Native Studies the first year it was offered for grade 11 social studies. My lovely Quadgil teacher, thanks. It described pre-contact and post-contact situations quite well. As far as I could tell, she was telling her truth. She spoke of potlatches where slaves were laying on the beach for the fully laden dugouts to be dragged up over these slaves as a display of wealth. Now, Captain Cook, there used to be a statue there. England effectively outlawed slavery before Cook arrived here because of a law case there in which slavery was found to be totally unsupportable in the common law. That was 1773. 5 years later, Cook arrived here. The British outlawed slavery, abolished it throughout the empire before Vancouver Island became a colony. That was 1832. Vancouver Island became an unofficial colony in 1849. There was the Qualicum massacres. There's so many instances of mass really flew in the face of the world's first successful social justice movement, which was the abolition of slavery, which was very widespread in this coast before contact. Now, since then, I was with Occupy. I marched with Idle No More. I was named Raven by Bo Dick and Haida Gwaii, so I am Raven. Okay, let's get that straight. You know, we work for justice as skeletons in the closet, and Natives are no exception. We gotta send these historical gripes, and indeed, truth must come before reconciliation, as that sign says. And yeah, but those who are standing with these lies, that was a malicious lie that 215 children, some as young as 3 years old, were found at Kamloops. That was untrue, categorically false. I don't know how they came up with that, actually. So, yeah, in a spirit of reconciliation, let's have truth and move forward. And I've worked in a lot of remote settings in logging and tree planting and others. I tend to get along better with First Nations. They're very soulful, fun people. And I know that a lot of the Indians are unhappy with the chiefs. What we have, the chiefs are flagrantly corrupt. Obscenely so, I can say that loud and clear because it's true.
That's actually true.
Truth speech is not hate. Meanwhile, what's happening in our schools, children are being indoctrinated, groomed towards dangerous, irreversible medical experiments. These are the people that we must hold to account now, because it's still happening. Men cannot get pregnant. Puberty blockers are not safe. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Hal. I just wanted to respond to that gentleman because I thought that was really great that he came up and spoke, because often we just don't have those kinds of ideas aired to be responded to. I wish that he had stayed around so that we could continue the conversation, but he made two claims. One is about children being taken away from their parents. The second was about the destruction of Aboriginal languages. So those were the two things. And both of those need to be examined within a kind of a historical context. So the first one is the taking of children. There was application process for residential schools. So most parents applied to have their children enter into the residential schools. And in cases where applications, you had situations where children did not have applications, those often were child welfare cases where you had serious problems of abuse and neglect that existed in schools, and that so the residential schools served a welfare function. And what happened is that in the, I believe it was the 1940s, or it might have been the 1930s, the government wanted to shut down the residential schools, and Greg Piasecki writes a really good piece in C2C Journal about how the many Aboriginal groups resisted the closure of the schools because the question was, what do we do about the neglected children? Where do they go? And if you close the schools, there'll be no place for them to be. So that's the first issue. The second issue is the languages. There's a really good Fifth Estate episode that was done in 1991, I think, about the Williams Lake school, and you had a brother who was talking, and he was sent to, he didn't want to go there, he wanted to go to Africa, but they sent him to Williams Lake. He said it was just a terrible environment. There was drunkenness, constant drunkenness, and they actually had a woman interviewed who was Aboriginal, who said that the residential school was the only place she felt safe because her family was, this drunkenness and so on. And this man, the brother, said at the time, they blame us for destroying their languages, but in the BC, there was over 30 Aboriginal languages that were spoken. If you didn't teach the Aboriginal children English, and if you're in Quebec, French, they wouldn't have been able to communicate within the wider society to be successful economically. And often immersion is the way in which
Still
you
not
teach
successful.
languages most effectively. So that's kind of another side of the story. That was his way of explaining that, which maybe it was done too harshly and so on. I don't know the situation, but it wasn't just, we want to destroy you and therefore we're going to do it through stopping you from speaking your languages. There were reasons why this happened. They might have not balanced appropriately the Aboriginal perspective because there was a lot of paternalism, but it wasn't this kind of we want to destroy you kind of mentality. Any other?
there.
Yeah, please come.
Francis, can you talk about what he said about Mackenzie King, like that quote?
Johnny MacDonald?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
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 Yeah,
Mackenzie.
I don't think Johnny MacDonald said that. I know Duncan Kamloops
He just
Scott
after
said
Louis
some.
Riel. He was pissed off.
Oh,
The Louis
okay.
Riel
I
and
don't
all
know
that.
about the quotes, but the sentiment was, we need to get rid of Aboriginal culture for Aboriginal people to be able to survive in society. That was sort of the sentiment. This is a very difficult kind of thing to deal with, and it depends on whether you accept the theory of uneven and combined development or not, which is, are hunting and gathering cultures less developed than the cultures of modern nation states? That's the question. And if you do accept that they are less developed, then you are going to have some aspect of Aboriginal cultures that are going to wither away when they're participating in a more developed society. And that's the situation, I believe, that is the case with Aboriginal languages. And what's happening with these scripts, this is what really bothers me. And I know Dallas Brody gets a lot of grief for her discussion about the scripts, but this is absurd to have these scripts that are made up by linguists that are now used so no one can pronounce any of these names. Aboriginal people can't pronounce these names. They don't know what these scripts are. No one is going to learn a whole new script with a whole bunch of accents and W's and question marks and all these kinds of things, except linguists. And that is pure Aboriginal industry. These linguists who get funds to go and make up all these scripts and do all these things, that benefits no one. We have problems. We have educational problems in Aboriginal schools. They need to be able to participate in a modern economy and in society, and pretending like they're getting a benefit by, forcing them to learn all these names that no one can pronounce. And it's a little bit, we're going to make you uncomfortable, non-Aboriginal people. You're going to look at this word and you're not going to know how to pronounce it. And good. You should feel uncomfortable. That's how, blah, blah. So it's basically vengeance and these kinds of attitudes, which are really destructive to trying to work together and improve people's lives. But yeah, so I think that's the situation. Other people want to talk. David.
Hi, my name is David Brett. I'm with the New Westminster Times, and something I just wanted to say is to kind of bring it back to the subject of this event, which was the Kamloops announcement. And the idea that is justified to not excavate. Some of you may have seen a YouTube that I did from New Westminster Senior Secondary School in New Westminster, which was the site of a series of graveyards, cemeteries, dating back to the 1850s. Well, it was believed when the school was being rebuilt that there might be indigenous graves under the footprint of the new buildings. So they commissioned in 2016 an archaeological study, and they collaborated with First Nations people in the area, and there was more than a half a dozen First Nations involved. And they did identify GPR anomalies, about 38 of them, and they excavated them almost immediately. It was within weeks or months of the identification of the anomalies, and all of the anomalies were found to be spurious. So the idea that there's cultural protocols that must be engaged and that this would cause a delay is not a justification for delay, because the protocols are built into the legislation under the Heritage Conservation Act. It's part of archaeology is a regulated business, and it's overseen by the archaeology branch. The problem is that First Nations reserves are not subject to that act. So there's no regulation that governs their archaeological work. So that's something that concrete that the government could do. It could impose the regulatory framework around archaeological work so that the protocols that are already established can be engaged. So what's happened is, and one last thing I would say, because I come from the mining industry, I'm a big believer in geophysics. I've spent millions on all kinds of geophysics, and they produce wonderful anomalies. But the anomalies are not there. You can't sell an anomaly. It's not worth anything. It's there to raise money to drill holes in the ground or excavate the anomalies. Anyone who sits on the anomaly and promotes the anomaly and extends the life of the anomaly, their credibility quickly fades. So here we are 5 years later. The credibility of the anomalies has dwindled down, I believe, to zero. There was some credibility before, but the credibility of the claim of the anomalies has now gone. And the Kamloops have even backtracked anyway. But the idea that the anomalies would be unexcavated for an indefinite period of time, I think just causes the general public of Canada
What do you think?
to lose faith in our institution earlier. So I just wanted to make those remarks that it's about a scientific process, and it was presented as science. But the science is excavations. There's no real reason why excavations can't proceed right away. That's what happened in New Westminster. It happens in other places too. So you have to ask yourself, why? So 5 years later. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Did you suggest that there were some chiefs who would have been aware of, digging and not revealing any bodies, and that these same chiefs would have been talking to the chiefs of Kamloops? Could you go into that a little bit more? Because that was like, it seems like they actually knew a whole heck of a lot about what they were doing.
Well, it's a requirement of the Heritage Conservation Act to consult with First Nations, and that's what they did. They were all made aware, and in particular, the Chilcotin people believe that one of their chiefs, a Han, is buried where the New Westminster High School is. There's no evidence that that's true, but they believe it's true. But so the collaboration was there. There was monitors on stalls around human remains. This is a standard human practice across cultures. The Chinese have certain practices around the remains of burial, people who buried the bones or what. So it's not wrong for them to have very specific protocols that they want to engage if bodies are found. But those have already been worked out and are codified in law. So why So the idea that, well, we have to spend another 5 years working that out doesn't cut ice. Thank you.
Thank you, David. What's that? Oh, okay. I just wanted to respond to David because I think there's a couple of important points. The first is the Pine Creek. We should mention the Pine Creek case, which is...
Pine Creek.
Oh, sorry, did I steal your thunder? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Diane. Well, I won't say any more about that. I'll let you talk about it. But the second thing was about the Kamloops band is, although they did backtrack and say anomalies, they've continued with their deception by having things like sacred site. Casimir gave some testimony in front of the Senate, which was outrageous, and she was not questioned. And then we have Dina Jules. Let's not forget Dina Jules, who was the head. She's the one who said, let's go look for the kids in 2020. When Making a Killing crew came to the Kamloops Indian Residential School in 2025, she said there are graves in the orchard. She actually said there are unmarked graves there. Anyway, I'll let Diane talk about the Pine Creek case.
So for those of you that don't know about
Pine Creek case.
The Pine Creek Reservation in Manitoba, Pine Creek did the same process as they did in Kamloops with the GPS. And they did find some anomalies, and in the bottom of this particular church, they found 14 anomalies. The chief was wanted to get the answers, and he decided that, okay, let's excavate. So they brought in professionals, they came in, they excavated properly, which is exactly what they should be doing at Kamloops, and they found absolutely no remains whatsoever. They found evidence of like a fire, some broken pottery, and some animal bones, but there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever of any bodies that, by the way, were claimed by the knowledge keepers. Yes, we remember there was bodies buried there. Yes, we know there's bodies there. And the chief said, well, if there is, let's excavate and find out for sure if there is. So he took the right steps. I don't understand why Kamloops won't take those same responsible steps and excavate. They did it, they found no bodies, and they try to keep that story as downplayed as possible because they don't want anyone to know about Pine Creek and the reservations and the outcome of that. So that's why we need excavations.
Thank you very much, Diane. Other people who would like to say something?
We need some excavations.
I have a great aunt who died in the early 60s in France. She was buried in the village, and recently my brother told me that the site where she was buried was used for somebody else, and they found no trace of her body, that her bones had disappeared. So that makes me wonder about those sites in Kamloops or Pine Creek. How long do bones last? Do they always stay for hundreds of years, or are they just for decades in the earth? That's a question that I have.
Thank you very much. My understanding is that depends on the soil. So if the soil is sandy, they'll last longer. If the soil is wet, they will decompose more quickly. You can do, there's some types of technology where you can look at, I think it's acids. You can take samples to see if there's any DNA in the soil. So that's another thing to be done. But I should mention about Kamloops is not one parent has said that their child never came home from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So if that's the case, and Casimir was questioned on this in the Senate, and they let her get away with this, which is, it was his first name is Scott McInnes, I think his name is a senator. He said, how many of the 215 have been identified, the names of the 215. Like, so we can match the names of the missing to the 215 anomalies.
What
And
about the Queen?
she said that's beyond
sure the
my,
Queen killed
out of
about
my sphere,
four
or
or
she
five
couldn't,
kids.
she could not answer that. She's
Queen,
there
she's the last
to
living
testify
descendant
about
of
this
the
subject.
Dead people.
She is not being honest and is not being accountable for what has happened with her band. And she needs to be held to account. Stop having a lower standard for Aboriginal Neo-Tribal elites than you do for other leaders. They are receiving public funds. This is unacceptable. So I think that's a big thing about Kamloops. As well, I should mention other pieces of evidence. In the 1990s, the RCMP did a massive investigation across BC because of the sexual abuse claims, but they were looking at all criminal acts. No one said anything about burials at Kamloops. In 1993, the Royal Commission held hearings in the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Manny Jules was testifying there, as was Charlene Bello. They said nothing about burials at that event. 2000, Agnes Jack did Behind Closed Doors. No mention of burials in that book. 2013, Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. Jeanette Jules was testifying. No mention of burials at that hearing. So if there was these stories, or were these stories happening, why didn't they say anything in any of these events? They only started talking when Sarah Bollier came out with her